Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session. I am Celia from PrestaShop. This is the last day of the PrestaShop e-commerce week, and we are really happy to have you with us. I would like to give a special thanks to our sponsors, PayPal, Criteo, NS8, and also Parachute. This talk is about the automated test at PrestaShop, what we did and why we did it. And this is a little bit technical, but don't worry, you can ask your question in the chat and we'll try to answer them at the end of the session. Now I will welcome Simon on stage, who is going to give the presentation, and have a good one. Hi, Simon, how are you?
Hello, thank you, I'm fine. Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for being here with us today. I wanted to start by introducing myself. So I'm Simon Garny, I'm the QA manager at PrestaShop. I've been at PrestaShop for about a year and a half. So I'm sorry, I was supposed to be with Bookcare, but sadly could not make it. So I'm going to do this talk alone. So this talk is about automated test in PrestaShop, like Celia said, and what we did and why we did it. Like she said, it will be a little bit technical, but not that much. And I will answer all your questions at the end of the presentation. This is a summary of this talk. It's pretty simple. We'll start with a little history about automation at PrestaShop. Then we'll get a few key points about the former situation, the current situation, and the future situation. We'll end the presentation with a little bit about how you can either help us or use our work to test your own modules or even test a build in a client environment, for example. So a little bit of history. How do we use automation at PrestaShop? As you may or may not know, there are different levels of testing. At the bottom of the test pyramid, closer to the code, you have unit tests and integration tests, and they are handled by the core developers using tools like PHP Unit or Behat. So these tests are here to make sure the code itself works as expected, and they only test small bits of code, like, for example, methods and classes, etc., etc. At the top, closer to the business, the product team will handle all the acceptance tests, which are the tests run from a final user point of view. They try to use all the key features and check if they are aligned with the specification they made before the development. All these tests are often manuals, but they can be automated. At PrestaShop, sadly, we don't do a lot of acceptance testing at the moment, so it's all on the shoulders of the QA team, who does everything in between. So we use mainly UI test, UI standing for user interface, which means we spin up a real build of PrestaShop, we install it, and we run our test on this build. That's called end-to-end testing because we will use the whole stack. We will use a real final build in a real browser, and we will use the real UI to test the build. That means we will test the front end, we will test the back end, the engine, we will test the database, the API, etc., etc. So I'm going to start with some history about automation at PrestaShop. What was the former situation? This is a description of what we had last year or so. So on the technical side of things, we had some classic stack. There was Selenium with WebDriver. We were using JavaScript, and we had a lot of problems with this stack. We had some inconsistencies, mainly some random failures. For example, if we run the same campaign 2 or 3 times in a row, we could have different results, which is really, really bad because it means all your tests are not fiable. And we had some problem with headless. So I'm just going to make a small parenthesis about headless and why we use it. So for those who don't know, you can run almost all recent browser on headless mode. Headless mode means you don't have any graphical interface, you don't have any render for the user. You have your process in the machine, in the memory, but you don't have any rendering. So headless is very interesting because mainly we run our tests on a CI environment. So there is no graphical interface anyway. It's on the server. So we don't need any graphical interface, and we can save some resources by running headless. And that's where the problem lies. With Selenium, we had a few problems with headless. Sometimes we could run a test in headful on our machines with the real browser. And when we run the same test in headless, we had some failures and we couldn't explain it. We lost a lot of time. Excuse me, and we lost a lot of resources too, trying to tackle those problems. Obviously, normally, the browser behaves the same in headless and headful, and that wasn't really the case. On the testing side of things, we had some problem with the scope of the campaign. It was really too broad. It was trying to test everything at once. It was some sort of do-it-all campaign. It was testing some small things like settings, buttons, forms, pagination, filter, etc. But there was also in the same campaign some really complex tests, really long, that were trying to test almost 7, 8, 9 pages, 7, 8, 9 features for every pages. They were trying to test a whole lot of user action in a row. And obviously, that's not a good thing at all, because if your test break at the beginning, your whole test is broken, you won't have any information, and it's really brittle and prone to error. There was also not a lot of documentation about this whole campaign. We had some comments in the code, but we didn't have any image of the campaign in text format, for example. So every time we wanted to know what exactly was tested, we needed to dive into the code and look for the code itself line by line to try to understand what the hell it was doing. It was really time consuming and not something we could do every day. We lost a lot of time again. But the main problem, the biggest problem, it was the architecture itself. This campaign was a giant monolith of code with no separation of concern and mainly no separation between the test logic on one side and the page manipulation on the other side. This was obviously not the right way to do. This was obviously really difficult to maintain and time consuming. So we decided to scrap everything and start anew. So back to now, or almost, we decided to create the new campaign in the new architecture last summer, so about almost 1 year from now. And we definitely switched to the new stack in January of this year. It's been about 6 or 7 months. On the first technical side of things, we changed the stack by using a modern automation tool, which is called Puppeteer. And we switched again recently to another, which is Playwright. And Playwright is just the successor of Puppeteer. It's almost the same team behind it. And Playwright is now backed by Microsoft. So it's a really good sign. It's a sign of quality. So they have a strong headless support. These two tools are very similar. So I'm going to talk about them like they were only one. But they have a strong headless support because they were built with headless in mind, headless first. Of course, our tests work in headless and headful. There is no distinction. But since it was made with headless in mind, we knew that we wouldn't have any trouble running this test in headless. And that's the main point for us. They also handle all the main browsers in the market, Chromium, Firefox, and WebKit. Playwright handle Firefox and WebKit very well. Puppeteer has some limitation, so that's also a reason why we switched recently to Playwright. It's more fiable, obviously, than Selenium. We have more stable results. When we run the same campaign 2 or 3 times in a row, we have the same results. And that's very important so that we can take these results and say, this is the state of the build. This is the final state of the build. We are sure of these results. We keep everything else. Our test runner, Mocha, our assertion library, Chai, and obviously we stuck with JavaScript. And now we have a beautiful nightly board to gather all of this data and display it. I will show it after. On the testing side of things, that's where it's starting to become a little bit technical. So we now have one main functional campaign. So this campaign will test every feature of every page by making sure every button and settings works as expected. We don't test whole user path like before. We just make sure every feature works in isolation in the page. We also added a sanity campaign for every pull request, written from the ground up. There already was a sanity campaign before in the Selenium campaign, but it was just a subset of the main campaign and not a real campaign by itself. Now we have a real campaign really separated. There is nothing shared between the sanity campaign and the functional campaign. What is a sanity campaign, you may ask? That's a good question, thank you. The sanity campaign is a small campaign. It's about 9 minutes long, and it's making sure every pull request is safe, with quotes. It will check every critical feature of PrestaShop to make sure the developer didn't break anything important. For example, installation of the build. On the back office, it will check the product page, the order page. On the front office, it will check the catalog, the cart, and the checkout process. If only one of these tests fail, we won't accept the pull request, and the developer has to check what did he break and what happened exactly. Obviously, we took this opportunity to document everything, to comment the code, and you can find on the build website of PrestaShop, you can find an article dedicated to the test and how we built it. We also used a new design pattern. That's really the answer to the problem of the separation of concern we had with the previous campaign under Selenium. And we use now the page object pattern. It's a well-known design pattern. This is the main thing. And the goal is to separate the test logic with the data manipulation, the page manipulation in the browser itself. Each page of PrestaShop is represented by a JavaScript class with its own selectors and methods. All these methods are used to interact with the web page itself, and the test calls these methods and only these methods. What does it mean? It means that all your tests are agnostic. They don't know what's happening behind the scene to accomplish data manipulation on the page. If they want to log in, they just call the login method. They don't know how exactly it's happening. They all know they want to log in. That's all they need to know. It's, of course, really easier to maintain. Either you change the test if you want to change your test logic, for example, adding a step, removing a step, you only change your test code. If you want to change the page object, it's all contained in the page class, and you only have to change here. For example, we can imagine that we have a migration of a page, and we need to change some selectors. So we will need to update the selectors in the object page, and we won't touch the test at all. The test logic will not move an inch. So the test steps are smaller, obviously. It's only just a few lines of calling some methods and making an assertion every time. So this is an example of some test logic. As you can see, we use our page logic to interact with the page itself. We also get back some information like the number of customers at the second line. And we use this information to make assertion, the third line. So for example, in the first test, in the first hit, we just want to check how many customers are there in the table on the customer page. So what do? We just call one method, the reset and get numbers of line of the customer page class, and we expect this number to be above 0. This is our assertion. We want to make sure we have at least one customer. That's how it works. As you can see, this is really small, a few lines for a test step. It's also really easy to understand. You only read the code and you already know what's happening. You understand what's happening. This is the page logic. This is the other side of the page object pattern. This is for the login page of PrestaShop in the back office. As you can see, it's a simple class file, and all the selectors are handled like attributes of the class. This page title, this .login error text, etc., etc. So we can use this selector in our methods in the class itself, or even in assertion, to make sure the current information we retrieved from the page in the browser is what we have here in our page class, and therefore is valid. For example, we often compare the current title of the page with the title we put in the attribute here in this .page title to make sure we're on the right page. That's how we make sure we're on the right page for every step, almost every step. Every time we change the page at least. So, like I told you earlier, we now have a nightly board. That's my project originally, and we remade it recently with a few colleagues. This is a report a board, excuse me, made to gather all the reports because we have a nightly system which is running on a CI environment. So every night we create a build with all the modification of the day, and we run all our tests against this build. And we have some results for every branch, and we gather all this data and we store it, and you can see here on the nightly board. So you can browse, you can filter by campaign or browser, or see the evolution day by day. This nightly board is public. Everybody can go and check it. It's on nightly.prestashop.com, and you can check right now. The image you see here is for the next version. It's a sneak peek because we are trying to update Nightly Board to handle all the new information we will get with the new implementation, in particular the possibility to run the tests in other browsers than Chromium. So after talking about before, after talking about now, what's next? Obviously, the future. What's going to come next? So on the technical side of things, we want to improve the number of browsers to add Firefox and WebKit, like I said. And we will also try to add more non-functional tests, like performance tests and API tests. API test, meaning testing the web service built in the PrestaShop build and not the web service of PrestaShop itself. Maybe that will come one day, but that's not the point today. On the testing point of things, we want to have a dedicated campaign for every purpose. Right now, we only have the functional campaign and the sanity campaign, but we want to add a regression campaign. Its goal will be to verify that, to check that we don't have any regression coming back after we fixed it. So we will have a dedicated campaign running only for a few issues and verifying they're still fixed and they don't come back, because every time we have a regression, it's a big hiccup for us in the development of PrestaShop. We want to add maybe also an end-to-end campaign, a functional end-to-end campaign, which means a campaign that will try to test every action a merchant or a customer make every day. For example, when you're a merchant, maybe every day you check, I don't know, you check your invoices, you check your number of customer, you check some stats, etc., etc. All these actions need to work for you to be efficient when using PrestaShop. So we want to make sure all this user journey, all these user paths are working as expected. So that's a dedicated campaign to verify that. Second point, maybe the most awaited, we want to give the community some tools to help you create some tests using this framework, using our work, because we already made a lot of work. So it will be a good idea for you to maybe use what we already did to go faster, to test faster, and to make sure all your tests for your modules and your themes works as expected. So you may want to contribute. That's very nice. Thank you in advance. So if you want to contribute to the tests, to the automated tests, you may want to make sure you understand some things. Obviously, we use GitHub. Since we're part of the core code of PrestaShop, we're using GitHub in the core repository, PrestaShop/PrestaShop. We are using the same system of review as for any core pull request. So if you make a pull request to add some tests, your pull request will be reviewed by some developers and maybe by us too. And we use some tools. So it's maybe here that you may need to understand what we're using and how we're using it. We're using Faker to create fake data, because we don't want to create, when we create a customer, when we create a product in our tests, we don't want to create always the same product, always the same customer. We want to create them with some variation in the name, in the summary, in the description, even in the image. So we use Faker to make sure every test is a slightly bit different than the previous, at least for the data. This is very important to make sure your tests are not just testing one way, one road, and not going a little bit on the side to test maybe some edge cases or something like that. Obviously, we use the demo data. the fixtures. Fixtures are all the data which is installed when you install a simple build of PrestaShop. You have some demo data. If I remember correctly, you have 19 products, a few categories, you have one customer, etc., etc. All this data is fixed. It doesn't change every time you install your PrestaShop. So we use this demo data because that let us make some tests without creating all our data before. So we use all the description of every customer, every category in a specialized file, and that let us not make hard-code references in our code, because that will be really bad if one day the demo data changes. We will have a hard time running through all our code to try to find when we made some references to, I don't know, some other reference that changed. Obviously, we use the classic theme for all the front-end stuff, since it's the theme that is given with, that is built in with the PrestaShop zip. We will only work with this theme. Since all the tests rely on the markup, on the HTML markup, we cannot sadly support any other theme. Obviously, it really helps. You can really help the project when you contribute. We can extend the coverage of our test, and we're able to catch bugs more efficiently. PrestaShop, as you may know, I hope, is open source. It's also the result of the work of thousands of contributors and not only PrestaShop employees. We currently have a coverage of 40% with our functional campaign, and it's still growing. So any help is appreciated, of course. So if you want to develop your own test, maybe, I don't know, you're a module developer, you're a theme developer, and you want to make sure that your module is working properly, is working as expected, at least, you will need to familiarize yourself with the page object pattern and how that works. What does it mean to separate your test logic with your page manipulation logic? You, of course, may use our internal methods. We already encountered a lot of problems when automating our tests. We had some trouble working with iframes. We have some trouble working with some Ajax stuff. And of course, if one day you're already having a trouble with something, just take a look at the code, and we may have the solution for you already built, and you can reuse all our methods. We, like I said, have lots of documentation. There is one article in the dev docs. There will soon, I hope, will be a full tutorial on the build section of PrestaShop. And obviously, all our code is commented, so you can understand what's happening when you read the code itself. So I wanted to make a real demo in real time, but demo effect and such, I'm not that sure. So what's going to happen is I'm going to show you a video of what's happening when we run a test. So maybe Celia, you can, yes, thank you, perfect. So I will show you exactly what's happening. Okay, I just need to put it in full quality. So this is how we run some tests. So this test is about the order page, and what you will do, you will test all the filters in the page table. So we will go to the order page. Everything you see here is a bot. We will check the ID. We will verify that the ID 1 has only one result, with 1 as an ID, and so on and so forth with the reference, with the new client, the delivery, etc., etc. The strength of this test is it's a loop. All the steps you see here are not hard-coded. Everything is in a loop. We have a loop for with ID, references, new client, delivery, etc., etc. It's also using all the information about fixtures, because all you see here is a fresh install of PrestaShop. This is the demo data I talked about earlier. So everything here is just not hard-coded, it's just in a specialized file about demo data. And we can use the data we get from this demo file to make sure our test will work always as expected. So it's looking for the payment by check. And finally, it will check the status with payment error and verifying there is only one result, which is the payment error. So this is the end of this test. I just stopped the video to show you we have 19 steps and we have 19 passing. And we have here the result of the run. And this is the type of result we get in the report in the nightly board. And this is the kind of result you can browse and you can see by yourself. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. This is the end. If you have any question, I guess you may have put them in the chat. So I will try to answer them. Thank you, Celia.
Thanks, Simon, for this great presentation. Yes, indeed, we have one question, which is, can I run the test on my environment to test what I do develop for merchants?
Of course, you can. Of course, all our tests are available in the GitHub repository, but be careful, our tests are stripped for the final build. So if you download the zip file, the final zip file you can get on the PrestaShop.com website, you won't see the test folder. It's stripped when we create the release. But if you git clone the repository, you will have the tests folder with all the tests inside. So you can have the unit test, the integration test, and of course the UI test. The UI test, it's our job. It's the QA folder, and you can use everything inside to try to run your own test. So there is a README file inside at the root of this folder to explain to you how you can install the environment. It's pretty simple. You just make an npm install and all is installed for you. And then you can check the README to see how you can launch either the whole campaign or the sanity campaign, or just a subset of the campaign. For example, if you worked on, I don't know, the order section, you may want to run only the order test, because I don't know if you saw, but the whole campaign at the moment takes about 2 hours to run. So you may not want to run the whole campaign every time you change a character in your code. That wouldn't be very efficient. So maybe you want to don't just the subpart of the orders category and just check that everything is still working as expected. Be careful, because if you made some meaningful change in the markup or maybe in the page itself, our test may break if something is not here and the test is waiting for something to be here. Or I don't know, if you remove a link, if you change the orders of the columns and something like that, you may run into some trouble. But if you just made some modification, just some minor modification, it may work as expected.
Okay, thanks a lot. Another one, someone wants to know if you run tests with most popular modules installed, such as PayPal or Colissimo or anything else.
At the moment, no. We run our test with all the native modules of PrestaShop because we only test the basic build, the vanilla build of PrestaShop. All the modules, all the external modules that are built by any other company, we can't support them because it's really complicated. But for the modules that are made by PrestaShop, we may one day add a new test for them in collaboration with the module team. We will give them the same tool we give to the community to create your own test and make your own test to make sure your modules work properly. We will try to make some library to give you all the data you need, all the information you need to make tests on a few versions of PrestaShop, not only the last one because that will be useless, but also going back in almost until 1.6, I think. That's still a work in progress. I don't want to to make people cheer, but it's still a work in progress. It's a real question for you, and we really want to help the community. So we're really thinking about it. Yes.
Okay, great. Another question: is it possible to have this test in modules?
Yes, like I just said, if the modules are, of course, made by PrestaShop, if it's internal modules, we will help the module team, which is the team that handles all the modules in PrestaShop, to create some tests, some UI tests, to make sure the modules work properly with PrestaShop and doesn't break anything in the first place, but also all the functionalities are working as expected, all the features are here, and everything is working. That's a long shot because it's a lot of work and it requires a lot of maintenance too. do. But we really hope to make something at least by the end of the year.
Okay, thank you. That's really clear. One last question for you. What is the roadmap for test in next versions of PrestaShop?
If I understand the question correctly, we will at least try to ramp up the coverage for the functional campaign, which is the main campaign, the biggest campaign, the one that gives us the most information, at least at 70% by the end of the year. And we will try to start the work on the regression campaign as soon as possible, as soon as we have a new version, I hope. And for the rest, for all the performance tests and API tests, we will wait a little bit because we are only 3 people in the automation team, so we need to prioritize what we're working on.
Okay, great. I think this is the end of the questions. Thanks a lot, Simon, for this great presentation. For those who are still online with us, the next session will be the closing speech of Alexandre Remy, the CEO of PrestaShop. So don't hesitate to stay tuned, and thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.